Well, let's go back to that last scenario. She gave good advice. She practiced. She talked about delivery. It still blew up. What went wrong? See, I really lied to you about that teacher. That's a great teacher. She doesn't do it that way at all. What she does is she says, Dad, here's a new skill for you. I'll practice it with you. We'll talk, check out the delivery and so on. But you need to know something. Your kid is not going to appreciate your change. He's going to argue with you to try to get you back to the old way, even if he didn't like that old way. So he's probably going to say something that you've heard before. It's not fair. Your kids ever say things like not fair? Okay. Do you ever have this fantasy like, if I just had the right lecture or the right delivery, I could explain to that kid why it's fair and then he would understand? Do you have any friends or associates who have this fantasy that someday they will be able to reason with a kid so well, provide so much factual information, that kid will actually stand up and say, oh, wow. You know, up until now, I've disagreed with practically everything you said. But now that you put it that way, oh, that makes a lot. You're going to see a new kid. I better rethink my position on that. Give me a hug. What's the chance that that would ever happen? What's the chance that it's ever happened on this entire planet? And yet, do we still have that temptation to want to reason with them? Because we think, I know that kid is going to continue to think that way the rest of his life, you know. But what do we do instead? And here's what this teacher did for Dad. She said, now look, when he does that, you're going to have to go brain dead. And you're going to have to not listen too much. If you can figure out right away that he's not a hurting kid who needs some sympathy, then go brain dead. And when he says it's not fair, I want you to just say, I know. And do it in the most boring tone that you could ever do. Could you do that for me? I know. Now, is it tempting to be kind of sarcastic? I know. Would we pay a big price for that? Absolutely. So how are we going to say it? I know. Now, can we say it even a little softer? I know. Well, and how's the kid going to respond? What can he do with those two words, I know?
What do you mean?
Not a lot. He could get mad. Well, this is stupid. And since we're brain dead, what's the answer? I know. And if we can drag it out, it even becomes more powerful. I know. Well, none of my friends have to. I know. Well, the other teachers let us. I know. We don't have to check our phones in the other room. I know. Now, I like to add something to that, something very powerful. These may be some of the most powerful words you hear in the program. And they go like this. So what did I say? So what did I say? And a lot of people will use this. They'll say, I know. And what did I say? Can we practice that? I know. And what did I say? Well, let's practice a little bit more. The kid isn't going to give up that easy, right? How about if you were at home? Have you ever heard something like, didn't ask to be born into this crummy family in the first place? I know. And what did I say? And why do we say, and what did I say? The only time kids want to argue with us is when we're trying to set a limit. Yeah. And when people say, how do you enforce limits? One of the ways is you don't negotiate. You don't argue about the limit. You just say, let's hear it. I know, and what did I say? Yeah. Well, you just had kids so you can make slaves out of them. I know, and what did I say? Well, and teenagers, how might they sound? Like, this is so lame. I know, and what it's bogus, man. It's bogus. I know, and what now we're starting to get a little bit louder. Isn't that tempting? When you start to feel the raw power of that, you go, yeah, let's get it on here, yeah. And how should we be doing it? Softer yet? Yeah, there we go. Well, this is stupid, I know. And how long can you keep that up? Now, is the kid going to say, well, obviously, this teacher's too skilled for me? I'm going to have to reel myself in? What's the chance of that happening? So, is he going to say, I better just forget it? Or is he going to say, wait a minute, manipulation level 1 did not work. Now I got to go to level 2. And how does it sound at home? You don't love me if you love me. And how does it sound in your classroom? You don't like me, you don't care. Yeah. Would you like one for that? How about I know? No. I'm reminded of the woman who came to the Rocky Mountain Conference one year. And she runs up and says, Jim, you want to see my new tattoo? I don't know. Where is it? She says, on my finger. Look. And on the first finger, in that first joint, she had a little smiley face you see in the Walmart ads. I said, what's that doing on your finger? And she said, oh, anytime my kid says I don't love him, I just whip it out and look at it, and it reminds me to grin. Now, why do you grin when a kid is giving you trouble? Terrorizes them, that's why. You say, oh no, the adult's grinning. This may not be the adult's problem. If it's not the adult's problem, it's bound to become my problem. It's a scary thought, right? She had 2 more words on her finger. On that joint, she had the word nice, N-I-C-E. And on that joint, she had the word try, T-R-Y. And she said, and when my kid says I don't love him, I just whip it out. I get a big grin. Let's see the big grin. Bigger yet. Let's hear it. Nice try, yes. Now, do you ever have fantasies about what you'd really like to say to a kid? Dr. Charles said, experiment, right? So here's something you can experiment. Next time you hear, you don't love me, or you don't care, or you don't like me, well, here's one you could do. Could experiment with. Oh, that was a nice try. And then suddenly I remember something. Oh, by the way, do you know that when I was your age, I used to say that very same thing to my parents. And then we can add this, but it worked for me. Now, is the kid going to give up or go to level 3? You're mean, I hate you. I know, and what did I say? And I have known some people, some kids to say, I'm out of here. I don't have to put up with this. I'm going down to the counselor. I'm getting transferred out of this crummy class. I know. What did I say? Nice try. Or, I'll love you wherever you live. Yeah. Now, have you ever known of a kid to go to level 5 manipulation? I bet you have some of those kids. What does that sound like? I'm sorry. I know I've done wrong. I'll never do it again, I promise. Now, have you ever heard any adults respond to that with something like, are you sure? Now, have you learned your lesson? I hope so. Okay, if you've learned your lesson, you promise to be good, we'll give you one more try. Well, I'm going to ask you a question. I've worked with, I think we calculated this at the office one time, that I've had about 900,000 people in live audiences like this. And in each one of those audiences, I asked this question. Have you ever heard an adult respond like that? Yes or no? Raise your hand. Yeah, okay. Now, I want you to raise your hand if you've ever seen it work out well in the long run. Isn't that amazing? And all those thousands of people, not one person has raised their hand and said, yeah, that's a really good technique. That works well. But are we tempted to do it anyway? Because we love them? Sure. So how would we respond to the kid who says, I'm sorry. I know I done wrong. I'll never do it again, I promise. How about this? Are we going to yell or whisper? Which is most powerful? Grin or frown? Grin. Oh, I bet you are sorry. And I bet you have learned your lesson. And what did I say? How powerful are those words? And what did I say? And as we go through this program, I want to caution you that none of the skills in this program are actually going to work unless we have the foundation, which is the ability to maintain that limit and to neutralize that kind of arguing. And it's not because kids are bad. Kids have a solemn responsibility to themselves and all the other youth of America to test those limits. And why? Limits provide a foundation for a healthy personality. And well, let me ask it this way. Do kids actually test the very limits that they need the most? Sure. Why? Because they need to know, am I secure in this classroom? Are there limits in this classroom so I'm safe? Are there limits in this home so that I will be safe? And I've got to test it every single day. So the fact that you get really good at neutralizing this, don't expect that they won't try. It's their job. And our job is to make sure it doesn't work.